Department of Justice Administration. And this is Kellyanne Doan. She is an honors student and a major in the Department of Justice Administration. She's a senior. And so I've decided that I'm going to let her introduce Dean Duncan.
Good morning. Professor Susan Duncan is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at the University of Louisville's Brandeis School of Law, and as you can see, she was recently named the interim dean. She's been a member of the law school faculty since 1997, and she's a former chair of U of L's Commission on the Status of Women. Her scholarship is primarily focused on issues dealing with children, and as part of this, Dean Duncan has been involved in a restorative justice program targeting juvenile offenders. Over the last 2 years, this project has grown into a fully functioning means of diverting juveniles, and there's movement to create a similar program for adults in the community. This project is unique because its inspiration didn't come from a criminal justice organization, it came from the Louisville Bar Association. And Dean Duncan has been involved with it since its inception. So, welcome, Dean Duncan.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be presenting at such a distinguished event, and I really want to congratulate Russ. I know it's been a dream to see this program get off the ground at U of L, and it's great to see that it's finally here at U of L. As background, a lot of my writing is about social media kind of outlets for children. So children, technology, and First Amendment and Title IX kind of thing. So I wrote articles about MySpace and bullying, and then sexting, and how they use sexting to bully kids. And so when that was all several years ago when that all was coming out, that I wrote those articles. And periodically I go back and review the articles and look at what I'd written. And at that time I was really looking at anti-bullying statutes. Were there statutes in the states that were dealing with bullying? And I didn't think that Title IX would be enough for bullying incidents always, because it's very hard to succeed under Title IX. I mean, it only punishes the most severe and egregious forms of sexual harassment. It's debatable whether that would even cover sexual orientation harassment. So at the time I thought there needed to be stronger anti-bullying statutes in all the states. And I think when we first looked at it, there might have been 5 or 6 states that had it. Now I think almost all of them have it. But they were still flawed. I didn't think that they were strong enough. They were really deferential to the local schools. So when I looked at it, but what I noticed most when I went back and started to look at my work, I did not have anything about restorative justice in any of my suggestions. I mean, we made a lot of suggestions about how to make the statute stronger, but nothing about this whole concept of restorative justice, which is really a process of when victims and perpetrators get together and deal with the aftermath of either crime or bullying and discuss it. And so today, I realized that that was a big mistake. I think that any solution to bullying or to crime with juveniles, a really promising component would be to have restorative justice principles involved in that. And also on a personal note, why I got so interested in restorative justice is I absolutely love law. I mean, I was the daughter of a lawyer, and I just loved going to court when I was a little girl and watched my dad prosecute, and I loved going to trials. I loved studying law when I was in law school. I mean, I was one of those geeky people that actually liked law school. I mean, I thought it was just intellectually stimulating. But I also had this other side of my personality that I really love social justice issues. I was raised Catholic, and my family always taught me that, to whom much has been given, much is expected. And I had an Ursuline education that had these core values of service and leadership and reverence and community. And I always felt like, my law life was kind of separate from this other life that I had. I just loved that part of my life, and I didn't see them really combining. And the great thing about restorative justice, it really combines these two things for me. So I get to think about the law from a different perspective than how I was really taught the law when I went to law school. So that's just personally why it's really rewarding for me to be involved in this kind of work. So today, my goals for today is to define for you all what restorative justice is, so you have a good understanding of what makes up a restorative justice process, what the values are, and then give you specific examples why I think it works in schools and in our juvenile court. Like they told you all, we're involved in this pilot program that's going pretty well down in juvenile court. So I want to talk about it real specifically. And my presentation is a lot more local than Russ's. I mean, this is all happening when I'm going to talk about in Jefferson County. Okay, so I thought this was a really nice quote to kind of start this talk. It says, "Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of creative alternatives for responding to conflict. Alternatives to passive or aggressive responses, alternatives to violence." And that's really what restorative justice is all about. It's just another alternative of how we're going to deal with either conflict in schools or conflict in society with juveniles. So a lot of people define restorative justice very differently. I'm going to use this definition for today. So I consider it just a broad term to describe a way of thinking, a philosophy or social movement to institutionalize peaceful approaches to harm, problem solving, and violations of legal and human rights instead of or in addition to using retributive models. And I think that's really important. I mean, if you use restorative justice, it's not that there won't ever be punishments in schools or in court. There's lots of restorative justice principles and procedures that somebody's already in jail or somebody's been suspended, but then to reintegrate them into the community, they go to restorative justice principles. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. I mean, you can use this in combination. So I think that's important to remember. Okay, so typically today, when we think of the penal system in our justice system, these are the things we're concerned about. We want to know who did it. So think about when the police investigate, our primary concern is who did it, and we want to know what laws were broken, and then how are we going to punish you? So it's very stigmatizing, right? We're going to punish. It doesn't really try to reintegrate anybody. And how many of you all have ever been to juvenile court? Has anybody ever been inside juvenile court? Okay, so a few of you. I mean, it's very cold and impersonal. I'm very fortunate that the juvenile court judges let me take our law students in there because it is confidential. So they let me take them in there just to see it. And when you see juvenile court proceedings, they'll walk in, these children, they are separated by the bar, so they're only up there with their attorney. The family's in the back, and the family is not able to say anything, mainly to the judge, unless the judge asks questions directly. The child's just looks so tiny up in front of this judge, and the judge is saying all these legalese things, and the attorneys are talking in the legal vocabulary, so the child really doesn't have any idea, what's happening while they're standing there. It looks very lonely, for that child. And the victim usually has no role in these. I mean, the victim's just sitting out in the audience too, maybe, doesn't really get to play any part of it because it's taken over by the state. So the state prosecutors are in there making the case for the state, and the victim doesn't get much of a role. So it's not very satisfying to the victim. So the victim walks out, and sometimes they're not satisfied, and I think you all saw this clearly in this recent Dietrich case. I mean, she was not satisfied, obviously, with what was happening in there. And oftentimes, I think these children leave, and they don't even know really what happened. They just say, we're going to give you a note for school, you've got to do these service hours, come back, and it's just a whirlwind. They don't even really know what happens. And when you go back out in the halls, you can hear the family saying, do you know what happened? Or they're trying to, and nobody's talking to these people. So it's very depressing, I think, when you go down to juvenile court to watch it. And some very serious things are happening in juvenile court. So if you contrast that to what we would ask in restorative justice, we would ask, what's the harm? So not who did what or who broke what, just what is the harm that happened? And there might be harm to the offender and harm to the victim. So we're asking, what's the harm? What needs to be done to repair that harm? And then who's responsible for the harm? The main thing about restorative justice is you have to be accountable to even engage in a family group conference. So I'm going to talk about what we do, and we would never take a case in the restorative justice movement unless the child that did the action admits that he did the action or she did the action. So you have to be accountable. It's not a trial. That if the child tells me, and I've had cases referred to me where the child says, I did not do anything. You know, I did not break into that car. Well, then we don't have a restorative justice conference because there was no harm. They need to try that case if the child didn't do it. I'm not going to make the child just say he did something so we can have the conference. So you only have one if the child is accountable and wants to talk about the harm and how to fix that harm. So that's how we're going to have a conference. So this graphic kind of depicts that. So definitely you have to have accountability to do a restorative justice conference. So we make sure it's not soft on crime. So when I describe this process, you're going to see this is not just an easy way out for a child. I think it's much easier when a child goes in front of a court and just has to do some service hours and it all is gone. Then if you have to participate in one of these conferences where we bring the child, the victim, and their supporters all together in a circle, and that child has to admit what they did and talk about who they think they harmed, and then the child listens to the victim and the victim supporters and how they've been impacted. That is hard for a child to hear, and they really get some empathy. And that's the competency development. So we're trying to develop in these children some empathy to know what they've done, to actually know what they've done. They don't feel that in juvenile court. They have no idea. So, for example, there was children that broke into a synagogue and they vandalized the synagogue. And the rabbi really wanted to press charges against those children, and they convinced the rabbi to have a restorative justice conference instead. And so the rabbi brought with him people who had survived the Holocaust and how they had gone almost into hiding when this happened because they were so scared, and it brought back so many memories, and they were having nightmares about it. So when the children heard from these people how it had impacted them, it was way more powerful than just saying in court, go do service hours for vandalizing the synagogue. And that this rabbi's convinced they will never do something like that again because they were really got to see who they impacted, and they would have never known if these people hadn't shared with them. So that's part of what we're trying to do is develop some competencies. And then community safety, and I think that comes in a lot with schools and bullying. So let's just say the normal way that schools handle a bullying incident and they suspend the bully. And then, 3 days later, that bully's going to be right back in school. So that doesn't make this victim feel any better about being safe in that school when the bully's just returning. If we have a restorative process where we can talk about it and figure out why it's going on, and maybe the bully hearing how it's affecting this person, maybe that would make the victim feel safer that things are actually going to change. A lot of victims don't even want to tell about the bully because they'll think if they get in trouble, they'll just take it out more on them. It'll be worse when the bully comes back. So for community safety, that's another goal of restorative justice. And then the big thing you'll see that's different too than the normal court system is you've got the community involved. So with restorative justice, when you have a conference, like I said, you have not only the victim and the offender when you have a family group conference, but you have supporters, and it works best if you have community members that these children will value their opinions. So it's it dates back to the beginning of time almost. A lot of Aboriginal people use restorative practices. So you think about the Native Americans with peace circles. In New Zealand, Australia, their Aboriginal people have these kind of circles, and that's how they dealt with conflict in their cultures, is they would bring the elders together who would actually talk about why this violated their community standards, and that would impact the children who had done anything that was wrong. So, it does work a little bit with shame. So you think about shame, that they're stigmatizing shame, and to me that's that child standing by himself where we say you're bad and you're punished and you're an offender. Or there's reintegrative shame, which means, yes, we tell you how it impacted us. We tell you how that you've made my life so much more difficult after you attacked me, and you've made my children have nightmares, and I have migraine headaches after this. So I tell you, but then at the end of the conference, we shift gears and we say, how can we repair the harm? What would it take for you to feel whole? And the victim gets to tell the offender what it would take. And then the offender gets a chance to do something to reintegrate himself or herself back into the community. So it's very different than how we usually look at it. There's all kinds of restorative justice practices. So the one I'm talking about is this family group conferencing. That's the one we're doing in Louisville. But there's victim offender mediations where you just get the victim and offender together and no one else. There's community accountability boards where you don't even go to court. You just bring the conflict in your community to a board of community people and they help do it. So all kinds of different ways. Okay, so we already talked about kind of how schools today deal with bullying. They just refer them to counseling or mediation, a penalty's imposed, and nothing really gets resolved. So this would be a much better way, in my opinion, to actually get some resolution. Okay, I just want to show you an example of restorative justice so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about.
A group of people started walking down the hallway. And at that time, I recognized them. I knew who they were. Actually, several of them were my teammates on the football team. So I wasn't concerned about it at all. I didn't think anything of it. And as they were walking past me, most guys still joke around, call each other names. He might call you out or something like that, just play around. But at some point, I think it crossed the line and it offended me. And I let them know that.
This is the beginning of a story about Ryan, his family, and about the young man whose blows sent him to the hospital. But this is also a story about accountability and healing, about compassion and courage, and a commitment by the Lansing School District to create more peaceful learning environments. This is a story of restorative justice.
Restorative justice has been a process that has come to us to help our students and our staff look at discipline in a little bit different way, especially when we're dealing with our most severe cases. Sometimes there's a natural assumption that an outcome for a severe discipline case is automatically going to be one way and one way only. What restorative justice does is gives us an opportunity to look even at the most severe discipline and decide, is there an alternative that allows us to look at the harm that has been done, still maintain responsibility for the actions that have been taken, but come up with a solution that allows a student to still maintain some dignity, the person who has been affected to feel like they have been heard, and to come up with a solution that doesn't always center just on putting a child out of school.
We went through the meeting, and it was one of the most powerful meetings I've ever sat through, because of course your child come home and tell their side of the story, and the other students go home and tell their parents the side of the story, and everybody's there protecting their own child, which rightly do what they should do. But to see the impact of when all of the stories come together, and to see the parents realize what had happened, it was so touching. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Everybody was just so impacted because, of course, those parents had not received the story that we had. They had no idea that Ryan had to go to the hospital, and it was, they don't even think they knew that there had been physical contact.
Drama students from Sexton High School provide us with a dramatization of what happens in a restorative justice process. Emotions can run high, but the facilitator works through the structured process to make sure an atmosphere of respect is maintained. The process is designed to get participants to think through 3 main points. The first is to gain a common understanding of the incident that brought them to the circle. This starts with the question, what happened? Next, the facilitator asks questions to help everyone understand who was affected by the incident and how they were affected. In the third and final part of the process, the facilitator helps the group make decisions about what needs to be done to heal the harm.
What I think is so powerful about restorative justice and restorative conferencing is that it addresses the real problem in such a non-threatening way. It gives the community, it gives the parent, the child, the teacher, whoever's been offended, a victim, possibly another student, an opportunity to be real and to be honest and to get to the core of what the issue is. Suspension isn't an answer. It's a consequence. Where restorative justice and restorative conferencing gets to the real answers of why an infraction occurred and what impact it had on our community.
Your word is your bond, but we also signed a letter, saying that, we accept this as a mediation, and we will abide by the guidelines that were set forth in the meeting. And to me, that spoke volumes as well, where everybody signed the form, parents and students, and that sort of sealed the deal, so to speak.
For Ryan and his teammates, this conference provided a way to restore their relationship, to literally allow them to play on the same team.
We ended up playing our first varsity season together as teammates. We all ended up being starters. And so we ended up having to play on the field and become a team, and your one goal is to win. And so you can't have other things on there, or else it takes away from the goal, what you're trying to achieve on the football field. So after the whole incident, after the meeting and everything, they're allowed back in school.
Ryan's story shows the power of restorative justice. And while restorative justice is not perfect for every conflict, most restorative justice sessions do end in a renewed sense of empathy, mutual respect, and understanding. Most of all, restorative justice offers the promise of healing and hope.
And I think the best thing out of that was, one, they're allowed to be able to go back to school and life school, go back to normal. Because even if that happened, if they went back to school, they'll still be, because this is not the same. And when normalcy is what the biggest healing is.
Does it work? Because a lot of people, think it just sounds great, but it just doesn't really work. Think that, when you talk about it, and I could show you some data that I think shows it works, but I think we need to do a lot more research to show it works. That's one of the things we're really lacking. There's not enough studies yet to show it works, especially in schools. They have some studies more in juvenile court that are showing really promising results. In New Zealand, they closed 13 detention centers after they did restorative justice for every single juvenile offense. So I think, it does work. Now, America's different than New Zealand, so maybe there's some cultural differences that would make it different here that we probably need to do more research on. I'm really glad Justice Administration's doing some research on our project, because, the academics really want to see this data to be able to design our program that'll work in America the best, even though we're using the New Zealand model. So just client satisfaction, the studies that I looked at, typically 60 to 90% are satisfied. A lot of victims are not satisfied with the current court system. They don't feel any better after the jury comes back or after the person's been sentenced, because they don't feel like they got to say their story. And a lot of them want to just ask why. Why did you do this to me? They just want to know some answers. And so this process lets them get to ask those questions and be a part of it. So typically you're going to see that they like this process better than if they just go to court and are a spectator. in their own conflict. And offenders, or people that cause the harm, is usually how we say it, they seem to like it better too, because they get to hear what they did and how it impacted somebody, and they get more of a chance to make it right, which they don't really have in our current legal system. There's another study that victims are definitely more satisfied than and offenders slightly more satisfied. Fairness, this I think is a really important percentage, and I can't wait to see the results from the Louisville people that have gone through it, whether they recommend it to somebody else. And so in a lot of studies, they're getting 85 to 90% would suggest it to a family member or somebody else in their community. And that's really, when Russ asked you, what's the next step? I mean, the next step is the word's got to get out that it works and that you want to opt into doing this. Some of the kids we talk to don't want to do it because they think, I don't want to get in front of this victim and have to explain it. They think it'd be easier just to take the service hours. So we have to convince people that there's a reason why you want to do it. Usually the restitution rates, they're better than if they're ordered by the court. So usually if you make an agreement, like you saw that mom say they all signed the agreement, so usually after you're done with the restorative conference, everybody agrees on what's going to happen. While you're negotiating that, the victim says what they would like to make them whole, and then you ask the offender, is that okay? And you talk about how it works, and usually you have a higher restitution rate, and those agreements are completed compared to just normal court-ordered restitutions. And like I said, New Zealand, they've done a great job in reducing their court loads since then. Other court loads in other jurisdictions we haven't seen as greater results yet. And recidivism, this is really interesting about the recidivism because we're kind of having a debate in Louisville right now. I'll show you what our criteria are. They're real low-level crimes that we allow it for, and some people think it works best with the most serious crimes. So we're having a debate whether we should be taking the most serious crimes or the lowest level crimes. That one study said it works best for violent youth, so not the property offenders, and we're doing the property offenders, so that's just one study, but that's kind of interesting. And then usually recidivism rate is better if it's memorable. You never want to make the person feel like they're a bad person. I get everybody to agree that we're talking about the act the person did, not whether this child is good or bad. And if I hear a victim get really angry, I might have to say, remember what we agreed. You're not, if they say he's just a scum, and then I've got to bring it back. If they're really involved in the decision making. I did one with 2 girls at Shawnee that were fighting in the cafeteria, hated each other. The families hated each other. I mean, it was just like the Hatfields and McCoys. I just thought, there's no way. This dad got up and stormed out during the conference, and we had to stop it for a while. But then I finally looked at him and I said, look, I am just a volunteer. I don't even belong in this circle. This is letting you all decide your fate. Or you can go and pay an attorney, and they're not going to listen to you for 2 hours like we've done. So it's up to you. Do you want to decide this, or do you want some judge to decide it? And these kids, both, I could tell with the citations, it was their 4th or 5th offense. So, they're not going to feel sorry for you. But this is an opportunity for you all to figure this out and not let some independent person that has no real interest in this figure it out. And that finally worked, and they did it. They got to an agreement, and those girls have not fought in a year, which really is amazing if you would have seen how many times they were fighting in school. Okay, our pilot program began in '09. There was a group of attorneys that had seen Alan McCrae at New Zealand, and other, not just attorneys I think, but really were fascinated with what they were doing in New Zealand and brought him to talk to them about it. And then they got all these key players, and this is why I think it's so successful. There's just so many groups on here. It's not just one group. It's not just the system players. So you've got the prosecutors and the public defenders involved, but you've got religious organizations. You have academics, so Spalding and U of L have been really involved in it. You have law firms involved in it. So it's just this amazing group of people that come together monthly to talk about how to get this into practice here. These are the ones that we take currently. So we take first or second offenses, so these are fairly new kids to the juvenile system. They can't have any prior felonies, and our offenses are, like I said, real low-level things. So vandalism, harassment, things like that is what we're taking right now. Little thefts, and they have to be in a certain geographic area. So it's police district, I think it's 1, 2, and 4. I think we started with maybe just 2. I can't remember if it's 2 or 1, but it was, so it's police district where they had the most kids come into court. So they tried to focus on that first. And the person who's bringing the action, the victim, has to live in that district too. So it's supposed to be true community involvement down there. Okay, so some of the lessons that we've learned as we've had some growing pains. I mean, funding is really critical to this. I mean, this is the hardest thing for us, to keep it sustainable. We had Libby Mills, who is our executive director, on a grant, and then I think the grant's run out. I think she might even be doing it free right now, trying to get another grant. So that's going to be truly difficult. And so we need, they formed a 501c3 to try to get donations, and they always are trying to get grants, and I think this research is going to help us get the grants, because sometimes you need to show some evidence that you're successful and viable, so hopefully we can get more grants. I think another lesson we learned is you really have to educate the community about what it is. People think it's real hippie, peace-loving. I mean, this has ancient roots. This is not some new wave thing. It's just how your parents, I mean, most of us had parents that, you know, if you broke out the window next door with your baseball, you had to go over, and you had to admit that you did it, and you had to say you'd work for the neighbor until you could repair the window. So it just goes back to basic values. So it's not some crazy thing. And it's not soft on crime. If you've ever been in one of these are hard to get through. They are emotional and draining. I mean, this is not easy for anybody in that room. And I think it has better results than what we're doing. So it's educating the people in court to convince them that they want to take the time to do it and get their families involved, and convincing the community. Managing the case, we had a little problem with cases were being referred, but then they would go back to the court designated worker and somehow we lose them, and it was hard to just follow these cases through. A big challenge is that people move a lot, so to try to find your victim again and to find the person who caused the harm is a little bit challenging to get them all together. And then, of course, collecting and analyzing the data. I mean, we really need to be able to quantify this about how it's working in Louisville. Just in as personal stories, 2 of them I did. I told you all the one I did was with the Shawnee girls, and that one worked out really well. My biggest lesson for that one is the facilitator really has, it's very scripted. You just say, what happened? Who do you think you harmed? What are you feeling today? And then you move on to the victim and say, how did you feel? Can you explain what happened after this? And so it's very scripted. And they teach you as a facilitator, to let them talk to each other, that you're the only person who really doesn't have a right to be there, and you're supposed to just facilitate this conversation and get out of the way, and if they don't even know your name at the end, you've been a great facilitator. It's very hard for me as a lawyer, I'm a problem solver, and I want to just, problem solve, and they don't want you to be, you don't really have a lot of emotion in it, which is hard for me too, because I talk and I want to lean forward, but then they look at you, so you're trying to get up, so that was hard for me. And I learned a valuable lesson in that they've got to come up with the solutions. It's not what I think it should be. So I made a big mistake in that conference because they were fighting on the street. They were walking up and down Portland and fighting on the street. So I just thought, well, could one of you walk down a different street? I mean, wouldn't that be a way we could solve this? And you take this street and she takes that street and y'all just don't meet on the street? But they said, do you understand that the police only monitor Portland's, the Portland street and not these other streets, and there's gangs, and she would get killed if she went on these other streets? And so I realized real quickly that I did not know their lives. and that solution would not have worked in their situation. So it made me, remember back to my training about how they're supposed to come up with a solution and not the facilitator. The other one I just did recently was just beautiful. It was the child was selling something for a fundraising project. So she sold it to the cafeteria worker, this salad bowl or something. It was $9. And then she took the $9 and went to the book fair and spent it. Okay, and she never gave the salad bowl to the cafeteria worker. So the cafeteria worker called the mom, and the mom didn't answer. And she just wanted to teach this kid that in their neighborhood, if you steal something, you could get killed. That this was serious. And so she pursued this and wanted to have this conference. And I was kind of thinking, this is crazy. I mean, it took me forever to get this conference involved or scheduled. And we finally got down to the neighborhood center at Shawnee, and all the lights went out that day. LG&E took all the lights out, so we had to do it. It was like 98 degrees in the front of the school. We're trying to do this conference. But it was the most beautiful thing because the cafeteria worker just bringing this little girl out about, you were avoiding me at school, you stole, and do you understand I had a friend that got killed for $10? But she said, I want you to have a big sister. I want the $9 back, and I want you to be in a Big Sisters program because I want you to have a mentor. And I love you, and I want you to do well. And that's why I'm taking my time to be here today. And the little girl, said she would do it. And I said, I know this has been hard on you to listen to your mom and this woman be disappointed in you. And the little girl said, I'm just so glad somebody loves me and cares about me. I mean, it was just, I thought, all right, I did not waste all those hours. Because this kid might actually get a break now. And if they had been in court, she would have just been slapped with some service hours, never gotten this mentor person that we could set up with her, and never was able to hear the lady tell her how much she cared about her. And that, somebody other than her own family wanted her to succeed. And so it was great, even though it was a real low-level thing. And I thought this was kind of a waste. So my experiences have been great with it. I know we only have a few minutes for questions, but, and I'm also teaching the law students once a year. I've been running a class to teach them how to be trained facilitators, so we can get more facilitators for the conferences, and also to kind of teach them another way of thinking about law. Because if you train prosecutors that only deal with punishment, or you train attorneys that only think about the way we do it now, it will be very difficult for this to take hold. I mean, we're lucky that we have a county attorney who's been real willing to do this. If we didn't have Mike O'Connell right now, I don't know how we could have done this. Because you have to change that mindset that it's not just all about punishing, but repairing. And that's not typically taught in law school. Yes?
I wonder if this could also be used, with child support.
Yeah, I mean, probably.
Would you talk to McConnell about that?
About that?
Yeah. No, and also, a lot of parents who are involved with child protective services, now there are a lot of cases that really are not handled right because people are afraid. And I'm concerned about that. But I believe if we allowed the parents, I'm an advocate, if we allowed the parents to talk, we would know a lot more about those cases. And a lot of people are really messed up. So, I like those.
Yeah, so much of our system keeps them apart.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's
But they don't
happening.
even allow the parents to talk.
Yeah. And so how can you?
And so, really, the judge does not really know the truth. It knows what a social worker or a prosecutor says.
Right.
Which a lot of times is not the truth.
The parties are taken fully out of it.
I can see in a case like vandalism, where the victim is an adult, the adult would really have no problem. Many adults would have no problem telling the child, here's how you harmed me.
Right.
But if it's a case like bullying, where you have a young child, I would think it would be so intimidating often. How do you enable them to have a voice?
And that's a great question. A lot of restorative justice is tons of preparation. You never have the conference until you've met with these people multiple times. So I go over all the questions with what I'm going to ask. I hear their answers, and tell them to be thinking about what they're going to say and thinking about how they can repair the harm, what kind of ideas are you going to offer. And so we try to do this so the conference is really just kind of bring it all together. It's not new to them. And there's a lot of debate about the bullying, using it because you don't want to re-victimize a child. And so that's why I don't like victim offender mediation for bullying, because it's just those two people. It's not this whole group of support that's around them, where you could have their peers say that, bystanders, that they don't like it either, and it makes them feel uncomfortable, and so then the bully gets a little bit more of I think, a better idea of how many people these actions are affecting. But it's your judgment call. If you think that this would be too traumatic, you wouldn't have a conference. I mean, you only do it if you think it's not going to re-victimize the person. So there would be certain cases where I'd probably say, I don't think we should do this. Yeah. This person's not going to be able to do it, and it'll just be too traumatic. So that's why you just need to be trained on, when you're doing that prep work, how to know if it's going to work or not. But they do it for serious cases. I mean, they do it for everything, murder, everything, in other countries. So it can be done, it's just how well you're trained. They do it for sheriff for domestic violence. There's a big debate about that too. Do you want the abuser in there? But a lot of evidence is that it works for certain families. So.
Well, I did a court appointed special advocate at CASA before, and it always felt like, I mean, even outside of domestic violence, even like in child custody, like the people come in thinking, I'm going to have my day in court, and I'm going to get to say that you did this, this, and this. And they come in, and they get the person up there, and they get all their witnesses, and it's just awful, And then at the end, they all look at each other. They still have to meet about the kid. They still have to come and pick them up and drop them off. And all of these terrible things have been said about both people. And so it's like nobody gets a good result out of that. Because, there's tension about then, what happens. And then they have all those memories of that terrible court experience where everything was said. And they didn't really get to say it the way they would want to say it anyway, because the lawyer is asking the questions. The lawyer has certain, ways that they have to ask them. And they're trying to win their case. So, I just feel like if they had this kind of time where they could meet outside of it and have some prep, like this is what we're going to go over, how would you say this, what's important to you, I think that they would get a much better result, and then the family could go on and heal. Even though they still have to share custody and do all those hard things, they wouldn't have that, terrible experience. So.
And a big part of it at the end, when the facilitator's writing up the agreement, you have them have little snacks or food, and they start to interact together while you're doing that, so you start the healing right there. So here are these girls who I thought this dad was going to kill the other family, and at the end they were talking to each other while I was writing it up, joking around. I mean, it was amazing from when they walked in to the end, because I thought it was going to be a failed one when we first started, but it was transformative. And I don't know, you just have to see one to believe that it could really work. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say, just having been through some of these things, like afterwards, is there any research on how the long term, like do these people then, keep does the conflict not come back, or especially like when you're saying with something like this where there's two girls fighting, do we have research on that?
Yeah, I think we do it we're trying to do it for a year, to see how it is for a year. Yeah, but that's what they really are trying to figure out, exactly how long out, and when you say reduced recidivism, how many years are we talking about, and is it realistic to think if you don't change some of the factors that really it's going to reduce recidivism? I mean, is that even realistic? And so we are struggling we have social service agencies we can refer people to if in the prep work we think there could be other issues going on. But so much of it's got to have that too, I think, if we're going to make any real change.
So many times the children, the whole situation is the children who are bullying, unless they're doing what they're seeing at home. Because, see, I think there are a whole bunch of different levels of bullying. We talk about children bullying each other, but then there are adults who bully, folks on jobs who bully, teachers who bully. You know, there are a whole bunch, and we need to look at all of that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes children are patterning what they're seeing.
Absolutely. Or
And,
they've been bullied.
when children are able to be in a section like you're talking about, however it opens up some areas, sometimes people don't even realize how somebody feels when they do something
Yeah.
wrong to them. And some of those people are hurting.
And the girls in this case, it was all about an aunt seeing, you know, a guy. It was all about this guy that we finally got to the bottom of it. And then the aunt and the parents all saw how they were impacting these kids' lives who wanted to be a nurse and one of them wanted to go to the Air Force, and they weren't going to be able to do this if they got all these records. And so we finally got the adults who were really the problem, you know, in the room. They started to realize how much they were impacting these kids. And that would have never happened in court, that we could have gotten them together and figured out that it was all about this man, you know, and what we were going to do about that. All right, well, thank you all so much.